Hey everybody, I am back in Kyiv. I have so much to share with all of you. You can see just a beautiful sunset and something about how people, they're walking around, they're laughing, they're getting a drink after just this morning Kyiv was being attacked in one of the worst attacks on Kyiv since the war started, definitely in recent weeks. And so many deaths and children, and still somehow the resilience of Ukrainians comes through. And so experiencing some beauty amid so much pain has been a common theme since I got here that has been so impactful. So we went to the front lines. I think some of you could have guessed that's what we were doing when I said that we could have talked about where I was going. And I just wanted to, before posting a lot of different content that I will over the coming days, I just wanted to post this to say I'm okay and experienced a lot of stuff. And there were constant attacks happening on the towns that we were in. It was incredibly frightening. And that I keep coming back to as well, which is I was really close to kind of the zero line where the fighting's happening. And I got to talk to soldiers who are fighting, defending their country. And just for 2 days being in that environment where anytime you hear it's a drone, and if it's not a Ukrainian drone, it could be a Russian one that's gonna kill you. And then every few minutes you hear loud explosions happening all around, and just wondering, is this gonna be my building next? And for me to have experienced that for 2 days and to have been transparently really afraid, but knowing I was very quickly going to leave, then what I keep thinking about is this is what the Russian government, this is what Putin is putting soldiers and civilians and men and women and children, innocent people who just want their country, their freedom. This is what he's putting them through every single day, and they don't get to leave. And they're not gonna leave like I did after a couple of days. And so if I felt that constant panic, that was exhausting. I'm exhausted. I feel delirious. Trying to sleep in that environment is horrible. For 2 days, I think it really gives me a perspective that still, I don't think, lives up to what a constant experience is like. And that's what people are dealing with, and that's the idea by Putin. That's the strategy, right? To terrorize people, to demoralize them. I was asking, what's the strategy here? Aside from the immorality of mass slaughter, why is he just hitting random buildings, apartment complexes, theater venues? And the answer from the soldiers was to demoralize. If he can force people into being constantly afraid and tired of it, maybe he can demoralize them enough to give up on the fight. And I saw that there is something uniquely horrific about the unknown fear that is induced with that kind of indiscriminate attacking of just tons of civilian targets and all sorts of things. And so this is now turning into a whole breakdown. I have so many more things to come. After this video, we're going to post one where Kaylin and I, who invited me on this trip, discuss what happened this morning, which was a huge strike on Kyiv, and we were a few blocks away from it and saw it, and then drove up and were some of the first people to arrive on the scene, even before the first responders. And it was interesting because we were, and we'll get into this more later, but we were feeling like once we got back to Kyiv, we'd feel safe, Obviously the front line is much more dangerous. And so it was, okay, we're finally back. And as we're pulling into the city, then this huge strike happens. And people die, and destruction of these buildings and of people's lives and their friends and their families. And so I will say the hopeful part of all of this is that people here, and I'm not saying this because it sounds nice or because this is what people say, I'm saying it because this has been my experience. Ukrainians have a resilience and a passion and a will to fight for their country. I would ask soldiers, hey, you know, Russian propaganda pushes these ideas that Ukrainian soldiers don't even know what they're fighting for, or this is Zelensky's war, or whatever, or Biden, you know, this is Biden's fault, and what are you fighting for? And they would almost laugh, or sometimes they would literally laugh and say, our country, our freedom. We've seen what the Russian government, the military does when they come into towns. They torture people, they rape people, they kill people. And a darkness and a lack of the liberties that make free countries so much better to live in comes upon those occupied territories. And so we are fighting for our families. We are fighting for their physical safety and their futures. And that is what you should feel hopeful about. I just saw some of the worst parts of humanity, which is what Russia's doing. And I saw the best parts of humanity too, which is people in the face of this type of threat, this type of pain, still being motivated to stand up for principles. Many of them said, we are fighting for what America stands for. We want to be more like America than Russia now. Sad thing to hear when I feel like America is failing on many of those principles right now under the leadership of Trump, but at our best, it's exactly right. We should be aligning with principles, the very principles that Ukrainian soldiers and civilians have articulated multiple times throughout this trip, that's what they're bearing through all this for those principles, for that freedom, for that sense of opportunity that only is possible in countries that defend our principles. And so to see the best of people, the kindness has been, hanging out with people, medics, soldiers who are at any moment, every moment, risking their lives in a really scary, constant situation, life or death, who are so generous and so kind and funny, and we're laughing. And the word that one of them used was, this is my purpose. That's what, guys, I asked, I don't know if this is kind of a naive question, but I asked, how are you seemingly so joyful? I know that I don't want to be that person who's like, asking them questions in such a moment, but seriously, I was having a hard time being my normal jovial self because it was so intense. And she said, purpose. This is my purpose. And that gives me joy. As scary and as dark and as many people as she's lost, etc. And so that's what's hopeful. The country that you're seeing behind me, and in a lot of the footage you're going to see in future videos, there is something to be hopeful about there. And there's incredible darkness with what Russia is doing, but I think if there is any justice in this world, then ultimately Ukraine will prevail here. Alright, we are going to be, as I said, putting out a lot of other content of what we experienced right there, as close essentially as we could get to where the fighting's happening, where Russians are attacking cities that are being bombarded every day, and talk to soldiers, talk to young, kids who are still in these towns, and asking them what they thought of it all, and going around with a Ukrainian commander, etc. And so I'll be bringing that to you. But so far, the trip has reaffirmed what we talk about, which is that this is a basic fight for a country's future, independence, and freedom. And that's why it's so important that we articulate that to people, because the Russian government is constantly trying to mislead people and confuse people with their propaganda about what's happening here, an invasion of a free country, an independent country that has to be stopped. And soldiers would say to me, the reason why we're not going to give up the Donbass, the reason why we're not going to make these huge territorial concessions is because we have all of the evidence to know that that would just be a temporary chance for Russia to regain its energy and its resources and continue the aggression. And so one of my questions was why, as some people will ask, why not make territorial concessions? Which I've explained why they wouldn't, but I wanted to hear from them. And it was, well, because if we don't stop them here, then when are we going to stop them? At some point we have to stop this invasion and the killing. And that fight is disturbing, but it's inspiring to see the Ukrainian resilience. Okay, more coming later. Thank you all so much. I'm back in Kyiv, and I'll be traveling back to the United States pretty soon. Love you guys.